On this episode of Screenwriting on the Wall, Josh gets corrected about his favorite video game franchise, Jacob solves the zombie apocalypse, and I try desperately to talk about Star Wars. This is Screenwriting on the Wall. Alright, welcome back to another episode of Screenwriting on the Wall with your favorite non-accomplished media enthusiasts, myself, Zach Ruppel, Jacob Stewart, and Joshua Pruitt. And today we are talking the most hyped show currently airing on the airwaves right now, and that is The Last of Us on HBO. How are you guys doing? It's been a while since we last chatted.
I'm doing pretty good. I've been really enjoying The Last of Us so far. Honestly, it's one of the better shows I've watched in a while that has like a weekly that drops an episode every week. You know, it gives me something to look forward to. Been really enjoying it. So
I'm also doing pretty good. On a movie and TV related note, I guess Jacob and I and a couple of other people have been working on a project that will probably already be out by the time this episode drops. But I'm pretty excited about that, and that's all I'm gonna say about it in case this episode somehow ends up out beforehand.
Yeah, The Last of Us, to agree with your point, Jacob, it's been one of the better just all-around TV shows that hasn't come out just all at once, binge it, go, which I think was a format we got used to for a while with streaming services. The big thing with The Last of Us, I feel like, okay, so there are many different avenues you could take a Last of Us discussion. If you're a normie, I feel like you're just going to talk about TV and about like watching it. Oh, it's the next greatest thing since Game of Thrones on HBO. Oh my gosh, it's so good or whatever. But the real hype of it is that it is yet again a video game adaptation into movie or TV, which historically has not gone very well. There are fewer successes than there are failures. So are we counting this as a success even though we haven't seen the end yet? Is there room for it to still be a failure?
I don't need to see the end, you know? I'm going to immediately jump on that question because I actually recently had this conversation with my mom because I think that this is, and I love that you brought up because obviously everybody knows that, but they are. Video game adaptations into film or TV is just notoriously bad. It always has been. There might be the couple of rare exceptions where it's decent here and there, but for the most part, it's bad. But I love The Last of Us, just like I loved Uncharted, and that was like mediocre at best. But I love The Last of Us. And a long time ago, I actually tried to get my mom to play the first game because I just knew that she would love it. She loves movies and TV and as much as I do. And I knew that she would love The Last of Us if I could just get her to sit down and learn the controls and play a video game.
If I could teach my mom video games, she would love it.
And it was crazy. It was insane for me to start her off with The Last of Us, which is already such an incredibly difficult game. But I sat her down and I was like, Mom, I'm gonna put you on the easiest difficulty. I'm gonna turn on all of the like accessibility controls that are gonna make it as easy as possible for you. And she got a little bit into it before she got frustrated. But I like to tell people a lot that like I do think that there is a good mixture that I think Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann have perfectly nailed here of changing stuff that can be improved, but also keeping faithful to the source material. Because now people like my mother, who I've been trying to introduce to the world of The Last of Us for so long, can finally experience a story that I love, and I can share it with other people that don't or can't play video games. And I just love that because this show is phenomenal so far, and there's 2 episodes left at the time of recording this, but I have no doubt that it's going to end flawlessly. I don't know that I could have told you that before the series started, but I mean, they have not missed anything so far. I mean, literally every episode has been great. And I remember, I think it was episode 6 maybe, so the one right before this last one that came out, that I remember telling Jacob, because Jacob and I have been watching every episode together except for 1 week where he was out of town, and I remember looking over at him after that episode was over, and I was like, dude, every single week we keep saying this is our favorite episode. And we just keep, like, they literally somehow keep getting better, and I don't understand it. And it's just great. Like, it's so good.
The way I am with video games, I like video games, but, like, I am so bad about completing any video game. Like, if I do, it will take me months to finish it. Last of Us, I probably beat in maybe 2 weeks, which is, like, insanely quick for me, because I was just so obsessed with, like, the story and everything. And, like, there was one night I even stayed up playing it till, like, 2 in the morning, which, like, again, with video games, I never do. But just something about the story and the characters, like, it legitimately, to me, felt like you were playing a movie. I'm like Josh, I don't think that they've really missed yet. The thing that kind of sold me on the adaptation was probably the third episode, the one with Bill and Frank, Nick Offerman, and all that. Because the first 2 episodes, like, were both really good, but they were, for the most part, just, like, beat for beat adaptations of the game with, like, a few, like, minor changes here and there. But the third episode was the first one to totally be like, okay, we're doing something totally different. It's like, okay, we've earned your trust. We've shown you that we can adapt the story right. Now that we have your trust, we're going to do something a little bit different that's going to stay true to the show, to the game's themes and story. But we're going to stray off the road that you're familiar with. And it kind of formed its own identity when it did that. Because to me, if it was just... I get Josh's point of like introducing the story to people who haven't played the game, but at the same time, I feel like if it was just nothing but a straightforward adaptation, it would be a little less interesting. And like some of the story decisions the show has made, like with Bill and Frank's episode, I think makes it a lot more interesting, at least to me personally.
Yeah, I actually because you did bring up my point there, I actually do want to expand upon that, because I do agree with you, and probably for the same reasons overall, but just to kind of build on some of them. When you are adapting something, I mean, especially a video game where a lot of the gameplay elements themselves are not going to make it into the show because it's a completely different environment and you have to engage your audience in a different way. But also just because, like what I was saying earlier, they are finding the right blend of things that they want to keep the same story-wise and stay faithful to the source material on those, but also just improving in areas where they can too. Like looking back at something that they made 10 years ago and going, well, if I were to redo this today as somebody who has 10 years of further experience and growth as a person, these are some maybe things that I would change along the story beats. And I love that The Last of Us is just already so good as it is 10 years ago that it pretty much still holds up for the most part. But then there's also just like these minor things that somebody like Craig can step in and go, well, what if we did this? And Neil's just like, boom, I love it. And it reaches the audience. And
like when they made I can't remember the name of the character, the kid from
Sam.
Yeah, Sam, the little brother. They made him deaf in the show, which he was not in the game. And that was just a really cool detail that they didn't have to add, but they did,
For me, if I hear someone that's like, if someone is going to take a video game and make it a movie or a TV show or whatever, taking into account what the original game was, which in The Last of Us case was an RPG, then I would say, okay, well, it's a good story-driven role-playing game that already exists. So I would think if you made the adaptation, you would, for me personally even, go more beat for beat with the game and limit the amount of variance you did, except for areas like you mentioned, Josh, where you're doing like the gameplay aspects, because those don't translate. But follow the story and filling in where you need to beat for beat and not adding in too much extra or too many extra variances that could distort, or not distort, but dilute the game that you're adapting of. And that's just a personal opinion for me. I don't know if you guys would agree for that, or if you guys like video game adaptations to, like, if we're going to adapt it, we might as well sow some new seeds in there as well. Yes, Josh, I see your hand raised.
Well, I raised my hand just because I was like, I already know that Jacob and I are about to talk over each other, so I'll just attempt to signal to him.
No, I did not see that. I was not even looking, but you go ahead.
So I actually do have an opinion on this, and just kind of going based off of your last argument there first. I don't know if you guys have ever tried to watch like a YouTube video of like the story of a video game, like the cutscene movies or anything like that that people will upload.
I have experience with that.
It's not really the same. I mean, even the ones that you find where it's like they'll mix in minor gameplay details so you can pick up on like what happened in between two cutscenes. The ones that are really attention detailed, even in that way, you're still not hitting all of the beats you need to, or all of the important elements that you're going to get out of it. Because at the end of the day, it's like adapting anything. It's like adapting a video game. It's like adapting a book or a graphic novel or anything else. It's an entirely different medium where you have to pull certain aspects of it and definitely stay faithful to the ones that do hit on a lot of the beats that you want to. But you also have to change certain aspects of it because you're working in a different environment. I mean, it's the same thing as like it's the same thing between a movie and TV show too. That's even an entirely different thing. Not even just in the runtime, but the way that you structure the different beats, because you're telling a complete story episodically as well. And so you have to do it differently no matter what. And first of all, I think that video games are just way too long in general to be adapted into movies most of the time, which is probably why more movies fail, and The Last of Us is doing a lot better as a TV show than I think it ever would have as a film. I do agree in the sense that you do need to, I think that they should attempt to tackle the actual plot of games instead of taking a general premise and rewriting it completely. Similar to what they did with the Uncharted movie, right? It's like, okay, we're going to take these same characters, but we're going to restructure the story entirely and make it into something else. And that's okay to do in some sense, depending on, I guess, what it is you're doing. Because some people will just try to pull an entirely different story out of it, and you're building this entirely new universe with these characters that already exist, and people already know and love them. And I mean, honestly, that's kind of just what Hollywood is today. It's taking these characters that people know from past movies and TV shows and books and video games or whatever they can, because they know it's going to make them money. People already like it. They're going to go see it, whether it's good or bad. And it's kind of just barraging all that today. I mean, I can't. There's a handful of original films that come out each year.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I do think that it is important. I think that this is a good precedent that it is okay to actually adapt the original plot and source material more faithfully than some people have been with a lot of these video game movies or TV shows.
Well, and Jacob, I'll let you get your point too. It's like, I'm not saying like you mentioned the cutscene movies. I'm not saying you have to go necessarily beat for beat, because like you said, stuff's not going to translate. But you know, in the few action sequences or the few gameplay elements of The Last of Us that can't be translated well is just like story beats are translating them very well, especially when you get into the action sequences or actual gameplay sequences where you have to sneak around certain aspects of infected or sneak around compounds or engage in action. You know, those aren't going to translate very well, but I would assume those become like your action set pieces. So the setup into them is the same. And, you know, you're not going to match how people play through them, but you take what you think the characters narratively would do in that situation, play them through that situation, and then out the other side and continue with the narrative. And I just think that would be the thing. Because obviously if you were going to adapt, like, you know, the Tomb Raider movies that they made a while ago, Tomb Raider, at least back then, was a lot more action than it was RPG with the remake that they did somewhat recently. So there, it's kind of like, okay, well, we can't just take Tomb Raider and make it and directly translate it into like a movie. We kind of have to be like, okay, here's the Tomb Raider character. We're going to make her an action hero badass, which it kind of just became, was just like some B action movie.
Yeah,
and I think that was the best you could ultimately do with Tomb Raider.
Same goes for, like platformers like Mario and Sonic. You've got to there's not a lot of meat on the bone there to like make it at. You have
can't just make a movie of Green Hill Zone.
Right.
Well,
I will say when it comes.
also...
Yeah, but I will say when it comes.
Josh, you give Jacob his time, dang it.
No, he can talk. All I want to say is, when it comes to other video game adaptations that I have seen that I liked, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was solid. Okay.
Sonic the Hedgehog was great. Both of them were
in
great.
our good video game adaptation era.
And
That
the
is
Mario
true.
trailers.
They're learning.
The Mario trailers are looking good, I will say.
They're learning.
Yes, I'm actually excited for the Mario Bros.
How about that one trailer they dropped where it was just an ad for their plumbing company?
Yeah, I thought that was really
That was hilarious.
Apparently that was from the original 1980s cartoon or something. Like they pulled that straight from it. Just like with updated animation. But
No tangents, Josh. What were you gonna say?
Oh, okay.
I'm the king of tangents.
So what I was gonna say is building off of what you were talking about. I think that a lot of the time, and this is definitely on a case per case basis because it really depends on the type of world that somebody's trying to build out. But
And it depends on the game. Yeah.
Yeah, but they actually talked about this in the companion podcast for The Last of Us, and I think the way that they said
I knew I should have listened to that.
dude, I listen to every episode every week.
I have not
during,
listened to it
downtime
either.
at work or something, but I really like the way that they said it in the show because it was after episode 6. Because at the end of episode 6, Joel gets stabbed with a broken piece of a baseball bat, and Zach, I don't know if you know or not, but in the video game, that's not how it happens. Because in the game, he ends up falling off of a railing during a fight with somebody, and he lands on a rebar, and it goes through his gut.
Ugh.
And Ellie has to pull him off of it, and he's bleeding out. And the end result is still the same. He ends up falling off the horse, and it's kind of like a blackout moment, and that segment of the game ends. But it's a completely different scenario, and I like the way that they put it because he talks about how they really tried to ground the world of the TV show compared to the game. Because in the game, you have to have all of these gameplay elements that involve you killing a bunch of people and doing a lot more violent things that is not as realistic as it would be in real life. And in trying to ground it, you go, okay, the way that he said it is in a world like the video game, in a world where you're healing gunshot wounds with a roll of gauze tape. It's a lot more realistic that you can survive falling, 2 flights and landing on a rebar that goes through your gut. But in this world, that wasn't going to happen. In the world of the TV show, that's not as realistic. And so they decided to change an element of that. And they've changed a lot of things about that because your whole point was like, okay, well, if we're hitting a lot of the beats of the video game, of any video game that you're trying to adapt, then you kind of go through those gameplay elements and you still just kind of come out on the other side, and you're not necessarily depicting an entire fight or anything, but it's also not like that, depending on the type of world that you're trying to structure and it being on a case-by-case basis. But for this one in particular, it's like you can't do that because there's not as much violence in this world because it's unrealistic. And you have to decide what you keep and what you don't, and a lot of that comes down to what are the parts that are really important beats in the story.
So now, does this come up ultimately to the TV show? Which I'm ignorant on who the showrunners are and the writers and directors, if it's people that were tied to the game or otherwise. But does this kind of go into the fact of something we were talking about before the podcast, where the TV show is doing legwork narratively for the sake of The Last of Us, that Naughty Dog as developers kind of failed it on when they threw in a lot of their action and lack of player choice decisions with those action scenes you mentioned?
Yeah, I don't think that's the case because Josh mentioned his name a few times. Neil Druckmann, he was actually the creator of the game. He's actually part of the writing team and like is actually directed, I believe, a couple of episodes so far. So yeah,
So maybe
he's,
this is more of his vision, and
Yeah,
it translates
kinda,
better than the game where they were like, "Hey, you need more like action set pieces."
Yeah, I
like,
kind of
don't want
see.
to.
I kind of see it kind of like you write a work and then you come back to it a few years later, and there's a few things where you're like, oh, I don't like that as much. I'm gonna change this. Just
Yeah.
and yeah, build off what you said earlier, Josh, talking about like less violence and everything. I think that might be my favorite change they've made from the game to the show is that up to this point you could probably count on one hand how many people Joel has killed so far in the show, whereas in the game, because you've got to have action, you've got to be able to shoot people and all this stuff. Like in the tutorial alone, he probably kills like 20 people. Like, but he doesn't. Like the first person he kills in the show is at the very end of the first episode, and it's highlighting like a certain aspect of his character. And yes. I think the restraint that they show with when he chooses to kill someone, like it makes every time that they do feel more impactful. Whereas if he was just running around gunning people down, it wouldn't really feel that meaningful. It'd just be like, oh, it's more action, But here, like every single death has weight to it. And another good example of that I just thought of is in the game. There's a there's a scene that's in both the show and the game where Joel somebody gets the upper hand on Joel, like a raider or something, and Ellie, with the gun that she was hiding, saves him by shooting them. In the game, it's portrayed as a more like just more of like a bonding moment between Joel and Ellie. Like Ellie saves him by shooting the guy, and it's portrayed as like a positive thing. But in the show, she shoots the guy, and it doesn't kill him immediately. It like paralyzes him, and the guy is like begging for his life and like yelling for his mom and everything. And it's like a really sad and horrific thing, and Ellie's like traumatized from it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, just like the weight that they add to every character's death in this show is something that I really like. I think
I agree with that point.
Choice.
I agree with that point, and I think you just said what I was trying to say a lot more eloquently, probably because you've played the game and I haven't. But I agree, like that's the point I was trying to get across, and I just didn't do it very well. But yeah,
Gotcha.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think that when I said less violent, maybe I should rephrase it as not necessarily less violent, but there's less death and it's less often. But there is still a lot of violence.
It's more impactful.
Each of those deaths are insane, and I'm so glad that you brought up that scene of the guy that Ellie shoots, because
like that legitimately made me uncomfortable the first time I watched
it.
That is one of the most insane parts.
It's
like
crazy.
when he was like yelling for his mom and everything, I was like, oh god, like this is like legitimately upsetting to watch.
But okay, so we can go from that. So now we've covered our video game adaptation talk, I think, pretty extensively. So as far as The Last of Us as a standalone TV show, if we try to shut out the game and we're like, okay, The Last of Us as a TV show, and we analyze, its writing, its directing, its pacing, its art, its character design, all the aspects that make a TV show. How are you guys feeling about it? So like if you could separate your opinion from your game. It's easier for me because I haven't played the game. So it really is just a TV show for me, more or less. But for you guys, if you can separate yourself from the game, how do you feel about the show?
Yeah, I mean that's hard to do.
Jacob, Josh had his hand up.
Did he?
Jacob,
I am not.
It's okay.
I am not looking at
carry
that
on,
top
Jacob.
screen.
You're okay.
You go ahead. You go ahead,
No.
Josh.
No,
you sure?
You were already talking.
Yes, go, Jacob.
I'll be sure to. I will look up at that upper Zoom screen next time. I'm just looking.
Like it's not an argument for like, oh, I need to go first. It's literally just so I don't talk over you. So like, if you're already talking and I'm,
it's
fine.
Crap. What was I saying?
The TV show as a whole.
Oh yeah,
separate from the video game.
It's hard. Obviously, it's hard to separate from the video because the video game's still pretty fresh on my mind. Because I played it for the first time almost exactly a year ago. It was like last January or something. But
Happy anniversary.
Hey, thanks. I still think just as a standalone show, it's pretty phenomenal. Um, like the acting is fantastic, and I think a good part of that is, um, like the casting for Joel and Ellie was different enough that I can different that they almost feel like they're obviously they're very true to the characters in the game, but they still feel like their own characters in a way, the way the actors have interpreted their characters feels unique enough that it almost feels like a separate thing in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's very well done. I've heard some people complain about like the extensive flashbacks, kind of like with the Bill and Frank episode or the one with Ellie's backstory. But I have to disagree with that, just because I feel like, and this could be a whole other tangent. I'll try not to get too deep into it.
Oh no.
But with streaming shows, there it's kind of become a situation where a lot of streaming shows feel more like 8-hour movies than they do TV shows. And I think certain streaming shows pull this off much better than others. Like, I think Stranger Things is a good example of an 8-hour movie, quote unquote, done right. Whereas I like how The Last of Us takes advantage of its episodic format to where we can just be like, oh, hey, here's, an entire episode we're going to devote to a flashback. Like, you can actually differentiate each episode, whereas with a lot of streaming shows, it's like you could look at it as a whole, like a whole season, but when you think of individual episodes, it just feels like they just stopped it at a random point a lot of times.
Yeah.
But yeah, to circle back around, I think the show, separate from the game, is still pretty phenomenal, in my opinion.
I am gonna agree with almost everything that you said, and the few things that I do disagree with, I'll probably get to in trying to explain how I feel about it. But for the most part, I'm probably just gonna try to build off of that because I agree with almost everything Jacob said, and I think the show is phenomenal so far. But that said, I also did have I think personally I had a different experience with it just because I have a different experience with a game than Jacob does. Especially since it's such a recent thing that he's done, and I've known The Last of Us since the first game came out in 2013, and essentially that's not me saying like, oh, I've known it longer, that makes me more equipped to talk about it.
I mean, if you've known a property longer, you're bound to be more critical about newer things. I mean,
sure, but
just look at Star
I
Wars
only
fans,
meant that.
like.
What are you talking about?
No, I'm legally obliged to shut this down. Do not talk about Star Wars, neither of you. But all I really meant by that comment was that I think that I just have a different experience with the game because, to my knowledge, I think that Jacob has only played through both of them once.
Yes.
And
Didn't you play through
the
it
game
twice?
I played through it twice, like literally a
it came out?
week or so before the show came out.
God.
I've played through it probably about 10 times in total. I don't know. But I think that I just, when I went into watching the show, it was really, really hard for me to separate it. Not because I didn't know it was a different thing, because obviously I could separate it in that way, but I knew every single beat that was about to happen. And so it's me like, especially once I realized how faithful it was being adapted, I was like, okay, this is going to happen next. This is going to happen next. And it's so hard to separate it when you know everything already. But I think that by episode 3 or so, when it did start to change a little more drastically, it started to get a little bit easier. But also, building off of something that Jacob said, I think that Ellie and Joel are performed differently because the performances in the game are great by everybody, but the performances in the show are great in their own way. I feel like Bella Ramsey and Pedro Pascal have built these characters in their own unique way that is still faithful to the show, but giving their own take on it. And I feel like you're going to get that no matter what in any adaptation, because you're just not going to be able to hit the same beats that somebody else did. And if you are able to replicate something so well, I don't think it would come across the same, because it's a different performance. And if somebody's already given a great performance, the best thing that you're going to be able to do is a crappy replication of their performance.
It's like all the different Jokers we've had. Like, you know, they're all super different.
Right, and everybody's always comparing, you know, who's done best and at what and blah, blah. It's the same thing with the Spider-Man, right? So,
and as long as we all agree Heath Ledger did the best Joker, we can.
I agree with that. Yeah. Don't say anything, Josh. Okay.
Oh, okay.
I absolutely love Heath Ledger. I adore the guy. I do think he is a phenomenal Joker. I don't think he's the best. That's
if you say Joaquin Phoenix is the best.
Oh my gosh, that is what he's gonna say. That's what he's gonna say.
I'm moving on.
Finish your Last of Us. The point.
Joker's like a 6.
I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna move on to some of the points that Jacob made that I maybe disagreed with a little bit.
Okay, here we go.
One being the flashbacks thing, because you talked about how there's 2 episodes in particular, right? It's episode 3 with Bill and Frank. It's not as much of a flashback as much as it is just it pulls us out of the mainstream story that we've been following so far after only 2 episodes, and it puts us in a whole different environment with completely new characters. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, but they do something similar with episode 7, the most recent one, Left Behind, except that is more of a flashback because it explains everything that happened prior to the actual show at this point. It explains everything up to, well, not necessarily up to, but everything that happened before Ellie finds out she's immune, right? We go through the whole process, and it's based on the DLC from the game. And it's set, they put it in the show in the exact part where it's set in the game, even though it's technically like a middle of the game prequel type thing, right? Because there's actual like flashbacks to and from in the game that don't happen in the show. But that's kind of besides the point. The point is these are 2 episodes that completely pull you out of the story that we're following for the entire rest of the show and put you somewhere else for an entire episode. And I like the point that you made that it helps it feel more episodic, and I do agree with that, because I do like the episodic format of The Last of Us, and I think that the first game works so well in that format, because it's literally travel, meet someone, they hit on a part of the theme, and you move on, and our characters are growing from it literally the entire time. And that just happens over and over. And that's how it is in the game, and that's how it is in the show, and it works so well in a series format episodically because of that. I'm really interested to see how they're going to do that in the second game, because I think it has less of that structure. It does in some ways.
I have no idea how they're going to structure an adaptation of the second game.
This one was so easy to predict.
The structure for that
it's
is
going to be
all over
2
the place,
shows at the same time, and you choose which episode to watch each week.
Well, Stuart and I actually had a theory, sort of, about whether or not it would be split into 2 seasons. One, because the second game is, I'm pretty sure, bigger.
Very long.
It's a lot longer for sure, but I think it does have a lot larger of a scope.
That too.
And because you're also playing as 2 characters, it was about the same amount of time. In the first game, I mean, you technically play as 3 if you count Sarah, but in the first game you play as Ellie for a little bit, but then you go back to Joel, and then you play as Ellie again in the final little walk to the last cutscene. But for the most part, you're playing as Joel in the first game, and in the second one, you really it's literally the same story played out from 2 different perspectives over the course of about 3 days or so. And I'm really interested to see how they tackle that. If it's going to be like, oh, are they going to swap back and forth? Are they going to tell it from Ellie's perspective and then And sorry, I got distracted. Are they gonna tell it from? Are they gonna tell it from Ellie's perspective and then Abby's perspective? Are they going to split it into more than one season, like we were talking about? I don't really know. I got I got off on an incredible tangent because I was.
You're very
talking
passionate
about the first game.
about the game.
I love Last of Us, so I don't even remember what I was talking about before. So that's kind of the end of my point. I pretty much agree with everything else Jacob said. I think it's great.
Well, it's nice to know that.
Okay, the only takeaway I have from all that is that he agrees with everything I said. Moving on.
No, the great thing, what I took from that is that I'm not going to be the only one that like stumbles into tumultuous waters with my take. Okay, coming from someone who's never played the games, right? I just have the show. I have to say, the episode 3 and the episode 7 episode, and I knew episode 7 was coming because you can watch the next episode or whatever, and I saw that there was going to be a backstory thing, and I cheated and read wikis and all that sort of stuff. Those 2 episodes have been the single most annoying to me watching it as a TV show, and I think this is going to enter into, if y'all are interested in any sort of debate of opinions that are neither right nor wrong, just different opinions, is what you said, Jacob, about episodic TV series is different than how I just think about, or at least how I think about TV series, because I don't care so much if I can pick apart episodes unless what I'm watching is something that, the word escapes me, but is something that is like
a sitcom or something?
Well, something where each episode is just like, you don't have to watch them in order. They don't play out. You can just pick. Anthology, yes. Unless it's it doesn't bother me. But if you're going to tell a beginning to end story with an arc, I don't care so much if I can tell the episodes apart. I want each episode to be entertaining in that arc as I watch it. So like Game of Thrones and other stuff, but Game of Thrones is the easiest because it's the other HBO show I think of when I think of stuff. I couldn't tell you what happens in each episode of Game of Thrones. I couldn't pick them apart episodically. But I know where that whole show goes as arcs and as characters dip in and out and everything. And that is where I like stuff, regardless of movie or TV show. That's just what I'm a fan of more, which is the difference of opinion aspect. So when we had the whole flashback episode of Bill and Frank, for me, I was like, okay, it's cool to see how different... it, as a standalone short film, I was like, cool, this is actually kind of fun. I like this. But as it sits in The Last of Us, where I'm interested in the Joel and Ellie father, surrogate daughter relationship and the world and whatever, I was like, this was a waste of time. And then the same thing with the Ellie episode with her backstory, except less so because it's about Ellie, I was just kind of like, cool. Okay, I know a bit more about Ellie and whatnot. That one didn't rub me so much the wrong way because you learn about Ellie as a person or whatever. It's like at least someone that's involved in the story you're engaged in. But it was annoying for me watching it as a flashback. Other than that, I agree with basically everything you said about how good the show is and the writing and everything and the pacing of it. And it's been really nice. And also the points we made earlier about how they've made more of a point to emphasize the, really ground it. That was a good word you used, Josh, to really ground it and make everything make sense where you're not just slaying entire squads of fireflies or raiders or mowing down through a whole building's worth of infected or whatever. So I thought that was really cool. And since everybody's gotten to propose a tangent in this little response, I'm going to propose my own tangent, which is my own hatred of zombie shows or zombie media that goes from being about humans against zombie horde things to when the world falls apart, there will be zombies, but it's mostly just humans fighting humans, the same as always has happened, but now there's just a different wild animal in nature that is kind of scary, which is just another pet peeve of mine, which was awakened when I tried to watch The Walking Dead many years ago. I got up to season 2 or season 3 or something, and then I was like, I don't care. I can watch other shows about humans being a-holes to humans somewhere else. you know. But that's a totally different tangent or whatever. But that's my opinion on the flashbacks, which is the only thing I've really felt strongly of watching this show is like I could have done without the whole episode away from the main through line of whatever. Yeah. And so that's just a difference of opinion of like when I think about The Last of Us, when I look back on it, I was like, I would much rather be able to be like, this was the arc they went on, not so much like, in this episode this happened, this was this chunk of this episode and whatever. And that's just a difference of opinion thing.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying, and I totally respect that. It is definitely just a difference of opinion thing, because like for me, like when a show takes the opportunity to like say, okay, you know, the main characters aren't going anywhere, we're gonna do a detour just for one episode. We're gonna try something totally off the wall, different. Like that's exciting to me.
Yeah.
Like I'm always like, okay.
I do have to applaud that aspect. At least they were trying something new.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like I don't know what I feel like TV gives you kind of a unique kind of, the format is unique enough to where you can kind of just you can play a lot more and like just kind of experiment with format in ways that you can't necessarily like with movies, you know?
Yeah.
Like, cause if you're watching this as a movie and then there was like a 20-minute flashback about Bill and Frank's relationship, I would agree with you. I'd be like, what are we doing? You know, but the fact that it was TV and it still played into the main themes, like with Ellie and Joel's relationship, I enjoyed it. But I do get where you're coming from. Like if you were just like, okay, I want to see more of Ellie and Joel. Like I totally get that though.
So now
and I think,
we're gonna go ahead, Josh.
Well,
go ahead.
I just because this is the whole argument that I was originally on. I forgot about.
We've sparked it. Here he goes, full circle.
So now I gotta touch back on it again. And I'm not gonna say much because I definitely understand your side of the whole argument too. I just think that for me personally, and I think maybe you did kind of say it best, even though I don't know that that's exactly the entire reason. I just feel like when you're watching Joel and Ellie, especially when you know that's the whole story is Joel and Ellie, taking an entire episode to kind of like steer into somebody like Bill and Frank, even though I love that episode, it just feels like it feels like I'm being pulled away from everything else that I was already watching. And in a video game, if I were to watch that play out, I mean, obviously you couldn't because you're playing as Joel, but
well, it would have had to been like a special
in a video
episode
game, when you're going through that segment, even with Joel, with Bill and Joel, it wouldn't feel as weird because I just picture a game as more of one large cohesive thing compared to a TV show, especially one like this where it is more episodic. But that said, I do still really like it, and I think that episode 7 handles it a little bit better. One, because it's Ellie's backstory, and two, because I think it's at the perfect point to take a pause. I think that right after episode 6, when what happens with Joel, it feels like the perfect time to step away and go, okay, we're going to make you wait a little bit longer to see what happens to this guy.
Well, it's also important to learn what he means to Ellie. Like, the fact that he's on his deathbed, but not dead. And the fact that her backstory explains that she was just Dawn and Ellie could do nothing.
Everything that happens in the Left Behind story with Riley also, it ties into what's happening with Joel right now a lot better. Whereas the Bill and Frank stuff, I just, like, it does still connect, but it's more of like, okay, here's a story of what happens to people who love each other in this world. And it's kind of played out like that in the game as well, but the way I picture it in the game it is a little bit different, and that's just because that the whole portrayal of Bill and Frank's relationship is a lot different. It's literally almost completely
totally
opposite.
Different. Yeah.
But I picture the way that Joel what Joel takes away from Bill different, right? And I find it hard for him to do that when he never actually sees him in that episode, other than the flashback parts. But like in the game, for example, when you're playing through that moment, and Bill is like this sad old man who is impossible to love, and he's kind of like blocked himself off from building relationships in the world. I kind of picture Joel taking a lot from that. He's like, this is the person I'm going to become if I don't allow myself to feel that type of love again, because he's still thinking about, like, it's so early on in the game that he's not letting himself open up to Ellie. And it's like he sees a possible version of himself in Bill. And I don't feel like there's any type of connection in that way or in a different type of way in the show, other than the note that Ellie reads at the end and Joel briefly glances at. Yeah. And so I do like that episode. I think it's phenomenal. I just don't think it connects with the story as well personally. But that may just... I will say
I do think that the note did have a bigger impact on him than maybe what you were thinking at first. Just because, like, it has the comment about, like, this is our role in this new world, is that you and I, Joel, were protectors.
No, yes.
And that's kind of what convinces Joel to, like, stick with Ellie.
Yeah.
But I do get what you're saying. I will admit, it feels more natural in the game, and it kind of makes me think that maybe, I don't know, maybe some people could stomach it a little better in the show if maybe there were, I don't know, 2 or 3 more episodes, like, that kind of steer away a bit from the, I don't know, the main plot of the game.
That's a good point.
Could just kind of, like, have them experiment a little more, and they could be like, okay, this didn't feel so just out of nowhere.
If it was like an every other episode sort of thing, was just like an alternate story in The Last of Us or something.
Yeah, or like just every 2 or 3 episodes, you could maybe get something like that, you know. But yeah, I definitely see both sides of the argument pretty well.
Well, then the only way I can think to end this Last of Us discussion, where we have covered honestly a lot of ground, which is new for us, considering we like to get tangential about topics and whatnot, is the only way we can end this is by not letting off, or maybe letting off, the Indonesian scientist in like episode 2 in the pre-title scene or whatever, where we're first learning about the outbreak breaking off, because this stuck with me. This has stuck with me this whole time. I still see her face, which is, I'm going to put you in a scenario, but let's explain what happens in the show first. The outbreak starts in Indonesia through a fungus adapting to live in human bodies. Watch the show. It gets into the food supply and then into the humans. Here it goes. So this Indonesian woman, scientist, she studies fungus and she learns about it. And you can see she's shaken up because it's like already in, safe to say, like maybe 50 people at this point when she finds out about it. Yep. Maybe more, but they're just finding out about it. And her first instinct is to just like bomb, blow it up, blow Indonesia up and hope it doesn't get out of the country. And then if it does, tell all the other people to bomb, which is something we see later when they're traversing America as they stumble across a bomb crater, I think in Boston very early on. And Joel's like, that was the strategy they used when it first started, which I guess in like a late game scenario when, it's obvious you're getting outnumbered. Okay, sure. But for her first instinct, day one, to just be like, blow it up. I don't want to let her off the hook. So the scenario I'm going to put you in, Josh, I see your hand. I'm going to put you right in the scenario, is I want you to be the fungals specialist, and you don't have to have the preeminent knowledge about it, whatever. Just with what you know. Your solution, you've been presented with the problem she's been presented with. How are you handling the very start of a zombie apocalypse fungal outbreak? Go, Josh.
So I think it's really important that they tell that through her perspective, and being this professional that knows everything about what this could become. Because I don't think it's surprising at all. I mean, look at her response and then look at what still ended up happening. She goes, she goes, there are about like, you could probably count on about one hand or two hands, probably count on your hands, maybe some toes. The amount of people that have probably been exposed to this so far, right?
Count on your
You could
hands.
count.
There,
You could count.
it's 2003. There's like 7 billion plus people in the world. There's probably about less than 20 that have currently been exposed to this fungal infection. And she still goes, blow it up, get rid of it, because this is insane. And I think that's like really a testament to how serious this was, and it obviously was, because I don't know I don't think there was necessarily anything that was said that alluded to them going, okay, yeah, we're just gonna do this right now, we're gonna blow it up right now, we're not gonna wait any longer. I don't know if they did that or not, but let's just assume that they did. They were just like, okay, whatever you say. And they were like, they just dropped the biggest, fattest nuke on Indonesia they could find. And it still happened. 100%. She knew what the heck she was talking about.
Dang. Jacob, do you have an alternate plan?
Like if
Josh
so you're
is
saying if
Josh
I
is
were
going
the
full
if I were
nuke
the
mode.
scientist.
Yeah, if you're the scientist, Josh is going full scorched earth on the bacteria. What are you doing?
If I were the scientist, I would simply not get infected and stop the infection from spreading.
Wow. Simply put, excellent work. A Nobel Peace Prize for you, sir. Zombie apocalypse avoided.
It's easy. You think about it, it's simple. Yeah.
Just go get the shot or whatever. Just take a antifungal cream or whatever and just bathe in it.
Just don't let it spread.
Okay, so
I would just I would I would find someone I would find someone immune and I'd cut them and put some of their blood into somebody's bite.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. I think there's precedent for that. I think that worked one time. Okay. The only reason I bring this up is because I laid in bed awake for way too long thinking about what other options you could have chose. And so here's the thing, right? Is I recognize the honor in what Josh has presented this woman's view as, of being like, okay, maybe we sacrifice millions of people for billions of people, which is a social experiment we don't have to get into. If I was this lady, and I knew apparently that there was no sort of vaccine or precautionary measures you could take against fungus, which is so hard for me to believe that there's nothing you could do to prevent fungal infection. But okay, say that's true. Is like, okay, maybe our first instinct isn't to bomb. Maybe our first instinct is to, okay, everywhere that burn that food factory down and send out, get the prime minister of Indonesia on the phone or whatever. I think they have a prime minister. And be like, tell all the other countries, if you got food from this thing or anything from this thing, destroy it, burn it, and be on the lookout for this weird infection. And put that out initially. And then go into your plan of, okay, people who aren't sick, we need a way to distinguish sick and unsick and get them away from people. And I think a lot of this was influenced from, or a lot of my ideas were influenced from what happens in the World War Z movie, which is a B movie, but I think a pretty good zombie apocalypse. Good zombie apocalypse.
B movie?
In a
B movie or
no,
a great, like you're grading it B.
Like the category
Like
of
it's a
movie that is
B-plus
known as
movie.
B movie. A B
Yes,
plus.
okay, that's what I was trying to clarify.
Or B movie, like...
No, I don't like jazz. Anyway.
Because Brad Pitt is in it.
Anyway.
I had to clarify whether you meant like, yeah, this movie's pretty mid, or this is like a B movie.
It's pretty mid, but it's got a good zombie apocalypse, I think. And what they do in that movie, which I think is pretty smart, two smart things happen in that movie, which is one, they move as much of the population as they can off continent onto boats, and that's like their quarantine population where they can't get reached. And I was like, that's a pretty smart idea. You can't do that for everybody, but you call back all the cruise ships and all the carnival ships that are out there and be like, hey, you need to come back. We need to put people on you. Put them on the Navy ships or whatever. That's a pretty solid idea, I think, if you can make sure that they're like the quarantine ones that are safe. But then also, the other thing, which I'm so pissed that they haven't addressed this in The Last of Us so far, which is this lady gets bit in World War Z, and Brad Pitt just straight up hatchets her leg off where she gets bit. And in World War Z lore, that works. Now, I'm not going to argue how that works in World War Z lore. But if this is a fungal infection, right? So it has to enter the body, and then the fungus has to traverse to the brain for it to work, is my understanding. When you get bit, or if you're like Riley and get bit on the hand, or if you get bit on a limb, just axe the thing as fast as possible. If you have the willpower to do it, or if someone else has the willpower to do it for you, because that's better than being whatever else that is. Because in my mind, that's how that would have to work. I don't see how the fungus could instantly go from point A to point B. Josh is going to tell me I'm wrong with his hand. But
well, you haven't played the games, so
okay. Explain to me why this doesn't work.
I don't believe there is any significant moment in the first game where someone chops off a limb, but in the second game,
spoilers.
There is a woman named Yara who gets her arm cut off because she had been bitten, and that is a possibility. But going to your whole point with Riley and Ellie, but they're kids. I mean, at the very least,
I'm not saying
they're 14 and 16 years old. You can't just expect them to be like, okay, guys, I got bit on that little part between my index finger and my thumb, and now I got to cut my hand off.
I do have a possible clarification, Josh. In The Last of Us Part 2, because I played it pretty recently. I played it a couple months ago, I think. It's in November, December of last year. When they cut that girl's arm off, I don't actually think it was because she was bitten. I think it was because they were in that like religious group and she like sinned with her hand or something, and so they cut it
Josh,
off.
were you wrong?
I may actually be wrong because
now that I'm
thinking about it, Jacob may actually be right. I think
so
I
you're
just
telling me there's no
because
point
I thought about
in any
someone's arm getting cut off.
There's no point in the games or anything where they're like maybe
maybe her
is
arm
an
got
option.
crushed or something because I can't remember now.
You're telling me this never crossed anyone's mind?
I don't think it was because they were bit. I don't know. Like
honestly, I imagine
you've got a point because I've seen that in other zombie media. Yeah. Like they have to cut off limbs and stuff.
So I just assume it doesn't work, but I don't know.
Work in this
one.
So
I just assume it doesn't work, but I would think it would. So why doesn't
maybe
happen
there's just
often?
no significant part in. Hold on, I'm trying to think because I'm almost certain I've seen this. Because if it's not with her, I'm gonna do some.
Josh is gonna have to replay the game.
I'm not gonna worry about it right now. But I mean, that's definitely a good question to bring up.
I remember what happens to her. They crush her arm because she was like she did something to transgress against the group that she was a part of, and then they had to cut off the arm later because since it was crushed, it was infected and all that. Not with zombie stuff, but like normal infection, and like they couldn't keep it because it was like full of crushed up bone and stuff, so they had to cut it off.
I love that. So normal infection, which can get into your bloodstream and kill you, amputation is still the norm. But for this zombie apocalypse,
there's no precedent that it doesn't work either, though.
Like the little kid.
I mean, and honestly, maybe it is something that works, and there's just no prominent characters in our story that it happens to.
Okay, the little kid in the beginning of the series.
Tess gets bit on the neck.
Yeah, okay, you're not going to solve that.
I think Riley and Ellie are the only people that get bit on the arm, and I think because they're kids, they don't think to act quickly enough to cut the other one's hand off or whatever.
All I'm saying is I can change The Last of Us forever.
I can't remember.
You just have to play the game.
I don't think it's ever been brought up. I've thought about it before because they did that in The Walking Dead more than once.
Yeah.
Like somebody will get bit.
Yeah, that happened
a
lot.
They cut off a limb, but
those aren't even as thought out diseases.
They just never.
I just think it should work.
Yeah, I don't even think that. Maybe it does, but I don't think they ever bring it up.
Because like I could totally change the series because one, if you're Fedra, right, with all the resources, right, that little kid at the beginning, instead of being a monster and having to be like, oh, we got to kill him, you could be like, oh, he scraped on his knee. We're going to try above the knee amputation and see if this works for this kid and keep him under observation. If it doesn't, we tried our best. Dang it, he wandered in the wilderness for a week. What are we supposed to do? Two, right. Josh, I'm not saying a 14-year-old kid is going to have the wherewithal to do it, but Ellie loved Riley very much and was very distraught when she saw that Riley and them were both bit. Now, we don't know that Ellie is immune, but all I'm saying is maybe in the hardened world where Riley, one, was freedom fighter, terrorist, soldier person, and Ellie was on her way there. It's not out of the realm of fiction possibility. They could have done it. And then Ellie knows that it works and knows that it doesn't work, but let's say it works. Ellie knows that it works. Then she saves Sam because she sees Sam is bit on the leg. And she's like, well, we just got to cut your leg off, little silly boy, and you'll be okay.
It's a very fun thought experiment, but overall, I don't think it impacts the story too much.
I don't think so either, and it's probably not as fun of a show because that just makes my version of The Last of Us, everyone lives.
I think that also...
But with less live. They live, but with less lives.
I think that also in the context of, like, those two situations with Sam and Riley and Ellie, there's two main points probably.
Yes.
One, outside of Riley and Ellie being kids, it's also a really emotional beat about her essentially saying like, let's lose our minds together, right? Because
I'm not talking narratively, Josh. I'm talking real world.
That up kind of, but also with the stuff with Sam, in the game and in the show, I think it can both be explained, because in the game he doesn't tell anybody. He just wakes up the next morning and he's dead, which is really sad. And
Dang.
in the show, Ellie does try to help him in a different way, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, but she would have known.
And Ellie's the only person he told.
That's true. I'm not saying it was a good narrative decision.
If only she had a hacksaw.
All I'm getting...
that would have been the first thing she tried, was hacking his leg off.
Yeah.
Hold still, Sam.
Hold still. Don't scream. But all I'm saying is The Last of Us wouldn't stand a chance if that worked in the Star Wars universe, where limbs are getting hacked off left and right. And that brings us full circle back to the earlier Star Wars reference in the show that Josh shut down. Now we've come full circle. We've completed our total victory royale on Josh. He's going to go
now
replay
we're
the
talking
game.
about The Last
Now
Jedi.
we're talking about
Guys,
The Last
of Us is just Star Wars, but set in 2000.
The Last of Us? The Last Jedi? The
Last
Last
of
of the
Star
Jedi?
Wars.
That's right. We'll see you next time for a riveting Last Jedi conversation as we transition to what would happen, zombie apocalypse in the Star Wars universe. But you'll have to wait with bated breath for that episode to come out, because this episode's over. Because this is an episodic podcast, and you'll remember this episode forever as the Last of Us episode. We'll see you next time we get together to film this podcast. It may be about The Last of Us again. It may be about something totally different. You'll have to find out when you tune in next time. We'll see you then.